representatives? How does it impact the campaign itself and the president? We're learning little bits as we go. We'll see if part of that filing comes out. Thanks for joining us today on Inside Politics. Hope to see you back here at this time tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Brianna Keeler starts right now.
Thanks, John. I'm Brianna Keeler, live from CNN's Washington headquarters. Underway right now, 2 bills to end the shutdown, both destined to fail. And as the debacle escalates, more and more Americans are blaming President Trump. Isn't it ironic? The president says the centerpiece of the shutdown is to keep America secure, but many in charge of protecting the nation say the shutdown is actually making the country less safe, including on the border. And she's the liberal that conservatives love to hate, and she says the world is going to end in 12 years because of climate change and compares the fight to World War II. And a male nurse arrested in the healthcare facility where a woman gave birth while in a vegetative state that she'd been in for years. Hear how investigators found the guy. But up first, State of the Union stalemate. President Trump today vowed to deliver the annual address from the House chamber next Tuesday, essentially daring House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to disinvite him. We'll have more on that in a minute. Meantime, the stage is set for votes on 2 bills to reopen the government, but neither is expected to pass as this shutdown drags into day 33. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell will allow votes tomorrow on 2 competing bills, including the president's proposal that includes billions for his border wall. The Senate will also vote on a plan passed by House Speaker Pelosi and the Democrats to reopen the government with no money for the wall. All of this coming as a new CBS poll shows 71% of Americans don't think the wall is worth the government shutdown. Other recent polls show a majority of Americans blame President Trump and the Republicans for the shutdown. And in CNN's average of the latest polls, the president's approval rating is at 37%. While 57% disapprove of his job performance. CNN White House correspondent Abby Phillip is covering all of this for us. So, Abby, what are you hearing from the White House about this standoff over the State of the Union?
Well, it is the latest in what has been a shutdown characterized by brinksmanship and also showmanship. Just in the last half an hour, the White House finally responding officially to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's letter asking the president to postpone a State of the Union, citing security concerns. Now, in this letter, which is really dripping with sarcasm from beginning to end, the president says there are no security concerns with the State of the Union, and he adds this: "I will be honoring your invitation and fulfilling my constitutional duty to deliver information to the people and Congress of the United States of America regarding the state of our union. I look forward to seeing you on the evening of January 29th in the chamber of the House of Representatives. It would be so sad for our country if the State of the Union were not delivered on time, on schedule, and very importantly, on location." This is effectively the president daring Pelosi to disinvite him formally from delivering the State of the Union address, which would have been scheduled for next Tuesday, if that's what this whole thing is all about. The White House has been saying for days now that the security concerns that Pelosi cited are unfounded. The Secret Service and the FBI say it is perfectly within their ability to do this, but at the same time, the ball is in Pelosi's court. She has the ability to say that you're not invited, Mr. President, and if she does that, the White House has said that they are going to move forward with some plan Bs, some other options for delivering a speech to the American public on Tuesday.
All right, Abby, at the White House, thank you. And we have CNN political director David Chalian with us. So the president here is essentially he's daring Nancy Pelosi. And this also seems like a statement when you look at it that it's like he wrote it himself. I mean, it just seems so clearly in his voice.
Well, it's scripted for reality television, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this president has a flair for the dramatic, and he understands this move that he's making right now has just raised the stakes. Something he loves to do, have this high-profile moment now. And as you said, daring the speaker, who now has to make a choice. And then now Speaker Pelosi has to make a choice about whether allowing the tradition of the speech to move forward or to stick to her guns and say this should not move forward at a time the government shut down. Her security argument seems to be gone, which the Homeland Security Secretary made clear, the president made clear. So now the Speaker would have to make her argument probably on different grounds if she does indeed disinvite the president.
But really quickly, isn't he in a way just allowing her to show that she's the one controlling this, though, ultimately?
There's no doubt she's in control of this. She runs the process, as you know, Brianna. You have to pass a resolution in Congress to actually have the joint session.
Yeah.
And so Nancy Pelosi controls what gets passed on the floor of the House of Representatives. So there's no doubt she's in control of whether or not he speaks from the House of Representatives on that night.
Yeah, whether it works for her politically may be the question.
Right now, she's got the political leverage. You just went through those polls.
Yeah. Okay. So, in speaking of the polls, this puts more pressure on the president. Does it really? You look as well at the GOP. There's a large contingent that isn't in favor of the wall for the shutdown.
That is true. He doesn't have his party 100% unified in the position. But still, he's got more than 2/3 of his party who says, do not budge, according to the CBS News poll out this morning. He still has his base of support with him, Brianna. And so the question is, as it has always been since you and I sat here the first day he met with Pelosi and Schumer in the Oval Office about this and said, I own the shutdown. The question is he trying to win over the American public on this, or is he simply trying to continue to fortify his base and make sure there are no cracks in it? Every move he has made thus far suggests it's the latter, not the former.
Oh, great. Let's talk about 2020 contenders, because there's a lot of them, right? Okay, there's 9 who either say they're definitely doing it or they're exploring the run.
And it's January 23rd, and there are 9 already.
So it's going to get wild. So Pete Buttigieg, which that's how you say it. That's how he said it, I should say. I checked. He's in the running. He is an openly gay Afghan war vet. Tell us about him.
And he's 37 years old. He's the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. And he is young, as you noted, and that is going to be the centerpiece of his campaign, a generational argument. He said it today, and it works in 2 ways. He's taking on President Trump quite directly by saying, we can't turn the clock back to 1950. So he's taking on the whole Make America Great Again slogan. But he's also taking on his own party. He says, we can't even turn the clock back to 2010. By the way, that's when Joe Biden was vice president. That was the Obama era. So to have sort of the elder statesmen of the party, Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden, even Elizabeth Warren, clearly the congressional Democratic leadership in the House, in charge of the House right now, all in their 70s, he's making the case it is time for a new generation of leadership. What's amazing is he's not the only 37-year-old Iraq or Afghan war vet in the race already. Tulsi Gabbard is 37 years old and served and is also in the race.
Wow.
He doesn't even have that particular lane to himself.
That is saying something. All right, David Chalian, thank you so much.
Sure.
And let's talk a little bit more about this standoff between the president and the speaker. I want to bring in Reliable Sources host Brian Stelter. And you heard David Chalian. He said this is made for reality television, no doubt.
Yeah, I think what Pelosi has been doing is speaking Trump's language. That's what was so interesting about the initial letter discouraging him from giving a speech. Of course, we know Pelosi has the power to deny him the speech, but her initial letter, this response, it was as if the Speaker of the House was speaking Trump's language by making this about television, because essentially what is on the line for the president is his show is being canceled, right? His annual show is being canceled. That is where we are. He wants to go on with the show. She's probably not going to let him. But I do think it's telling that this Apprentice star cares a lot about this speech. He cares a lot about this television event. And I think it's really important that what Chalian was saying about the polling, we've seen the president give multiple speeches arguing in favor of a border wall and arguing for his position about the shutdown and the importance of the shutdown. But those speeches he's given have not helped him sway public opinion. If anything, they've actually done the opposite effect and turned public opinion against him. So I don't know why the White House thinks another big primetime speech will actually sway public opinion on the shutdown. That's a curious part of this. If they want to have a State of the Union address to argue in support of a border wall and argue for the president's position, the polling indicates that probably isn't going to work. I also think, I love the State of the Union. I don't know what you think, Brianna. I love the pomp and pageantry. But most Americans don't watch. Last year, about 46 million Americans watched in a country of 300 million. So it is not something that necessarily would even sway public opinion in the president's direction.
Unless he's not trying to sway public opinion because his base is with him, right? Which is concerning as we look for a resolution here.
Right, and he'll end up probably having a rally instead, right? If Pelosi says no, he'll end up having a rally. It'll only be carried on Fox, and it's not going to move the needle nationally, but you're right, it will inflame and motivate his base, and perhaps that is the ultimate goal. All
right, Brian Stelter, thank you. Meantime, federal employees call for an end to to the shutdown without saying a word. Gathering in the Hart Senate office building, more than 100 workers staged a silent protest. They held up paper plates to remind lawmakers they have families to feed. We have CNN national correspondent Suzanne Malveaux there following all of this. Tell us about what organizers are telling you.
Well, sure, Brianna. I mean, it really is a very interesting and very unique way of protesting here. It was called Occupy Hart. The organizers say that it was several hundred people who were actually gathered here, a lot of federal employees as well as union representatives who were here. They got together on Facebook, a page, more than 10 different organizations represented. And it was 33 minutes of silence. And it was 33 minutes of silence. 1 minute of silence for every day that the government has been shut down. They were not allowed to bring in signs. So they actually did have paper plates they brought in. We saw them write down these messages saying things like up against the wall and food for feds, things like that. And what they plan to do, what the strategy here is to let people know, hey, we are suffering, there's pain, also that the government shutdown has an impact on everyone. And then finally, and this is the final stage of the strategy, when we talk to folks, is that they are going to try to pressure members of Congress to open up this government and do something. I want to talk to Ryan Bow. He is actually somebody I met 2 weeks ago. We had a conversation. We went to your house. You're not working. You're not getting paid. And I just want to check in with you, Ryan, because the last time when we talked, you were volunteering and you were giving your blood platelets and you were feeding folks. And I understand now it's a lot tougher for you. What are you doing?
I'm trying to stay busy doing productive things. I do look for those volunteer opportunities still. I try to check on my coworkers and my friends, make sure that they're doing okay. This was an amazing experience today. I know a lot of folks that are afraid to speak out, to have their voice be heard, to say that we matter. But today we stood here in this atrium and told the world that we matter, our work matters. And some of these people I know, many of these people I do not know, but we all had one message today, and that's that our work is important. We matter. Don't treat people this way. We're anxious. We don't see an end to this. We want to see an end to this. It's time. When I met you 2 weeks ago, I did not think we would still be here today. I don't think anybody thought that this was possible. And the other day I was walking through the snow thinking to myself, I don't see an end. I don't see an end to this long, dark hallway that we're in. And I hope that there's some leadership that helps us find some light here for over millions of families that rely on the work we do and the paychecks that we do.
All right, Ryan, thank you so much. I wish the very best, and of course we'll be in touch with you. One of the things that people were saying that they're going to do, they call it bird dogging. I haven't heard that phrase before, but essentially it is running behind members of Congress here on the Hill, asking them what are they going to do to reopen this government. So as you can hear, Brianna, in Ryan's voice, really a sense of anxiety and frustration, and holding their leaders now accountable that there is going to be more and more of this type of activity on the Hill. Brianna?
Yeah, definitely a lot of anxiety across the board. Suzanne Malveaux, thank you. Now, President Trump makes his case pretty simply. For him, the wall means security. He says it'll stop crime, it'll stop drugs, and it will stop human trafficking. And he has shown that he's willing to shut down the government to get it. But the irony is thick, considering that the shutdown is actually making America less safe. Think about it. You've heard the stories of TSA agents calling in sick so they can find paying jobs. Add to that unpaid air traffic controllers, many of whom are probably distracted by the uncertainty of how they're going to feed their families. Wouldn't you be? I mean, that makes air travel less safe. So think about the food that you put on the table. What if I told you that food inspections are being affected? Fewer inspections mean more chances for a health threat to sneak through. FBI agents are also going without pay. They're having to rely on food donations from neighbors.
Realistically, FBI agents should not have to go work at a store stocking shelves because they can't feed their families on their government job. They're still working 50 plus hours a week. So when are they going to find time to go get that second job? It's ridiculous.
A new report from the FBI Agents Association has other details, like one Joint Terrorism Task Force coordinator who says they have lost informants at the center of terrorism investigations. They're also working without FBI translators, which is hampering investigations of the violent MS-13 gang that the president rails against. And agents say the FBI could soon run out of money for all kinds of investigations. Now, then there's the Coast Guard, the only branch of the military not getting paid, and that is not sitting well with commanders.
We're 5+ weeks into the anxiety and stress of this government lapse in your non-pay. You, as members of the armed forces, should not be expected to shoulder this burden. I find it unacceptable that Coast Guard men and women have to rely on food pantries and donations to get through day-to-day life as service members.
That means that our shores could be less safe. And finally, what about the southern border where the wall would go? Remember when the president was down there a couple weeks ago? The Border Patrol agents around him, they aren't getting paid. Customs and Border Protection officers, they just aren't getting paid. And some of them worry that they're losing the ability to recruit good people because of the shutdown. None of that is good for the safety of this country. And adding to all of the insecurity is the effect on the economy. One estimate putting it at right around $5.5 billion, which is nearly the same amount that the president wants for the wall. The freshman Democrat who has become a punching bag for conservatives says climate change will end the world in 12 years, and she's added to a very high-profile committee, plus how the student at the center of this controversial video responds to people who call him a racist. You'll really want to hear this. And police arresting a nurse in the terrible story of a woman giving birth while in a vegetative state while under care in a facility. Hear the clue that broke open the case.
Flex Seal family of products.
Authorities make an arrest in the case of a woman in a vegetative state who gave birth at a healthcare center. And the suspect, Nathan Sutherland, worked as a licensed practical nurse at the Hacienda healthcare facility in Phoenix. Officials there say they didn't know that the woman was pregnant until she was giving birth last month. Sutherland faces preliminary charges of sexual assault and vulnerable adult abuse. We have Sergeant Tommy Thompson with us. He's the public information officer for the Phoenix Police Department. Sir, thanks for being with us, and tell us how the department was able to identify the suspect and also what's next for him.
Well, thank you for letting me come and talk to you. So what the process that we went through with the investigation was after we responded to the scene, determined it was a sexual assault, our detectives have been working pretty much nonstop for the last 3.5 weeks to go through the process of identifying a possible suspect. That involved obtaining search warrants to serve to obtain records from the facility, and then those were followed up by court orders to obtain DNA evidence for comparison. So through that process, it was a process of going through and identifying anyone who may have had contact with the victim. And that's a laborious process. But they were going through, and yesterday they got to Mr. Nathan Sutherland, and they brought him in, and under court order, they obtained a buccal swab or buccal swab, which is a DNA evidence that they obtained. They went ahead and tested that with our crime lab, and our scientists in the crime laboratory were able to successfully identify and match that he was the father of the baby in this sexual assault.
And can you tell us about the baby? We know the family is caring for the baby. How's the baby doing?
The baby is doing well, I am told. And one of the things that we keep in mind is this is essentially the newest member of our community here in Phoenix. And so while we don't do a lot to identify the baby, because down throughout time, that baby's going to have a life. But what we do as a community is we put our arms around that child and say, we're glad you're part of our community. And we're tickled that this baby is doing well.
Well, so are we, Sergeant Thompson. Thank you so much for being with us, and we're very glad the baby is doing well.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
We'll have more on our breaking news. The president essentially daring Speaker Nancy Pelosi to disinvite him to give the State of the Union at the Capitol next week. And also, conservatives are once again taking aim at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, this time for calling climate change our World War II. We have some breaking news. President Trump has officially recognized a new interim president of Venezuela, and this comes after days of violent protests in the country. We have journalist Stefano Pozzebon in Caracas to take us through this. President Trump may recognize the new president of the Venezuela National Assembly, but the Maduro regime does not. Tell us about what's happened, Stefano.
Yes, exactly, Brianna. We're seeing history being made here in Venezuela in front of our eyes. The president of the legislative power, the president of the parliament of Venezuela, has sworn himself in as the new interim president, as the new chief of state of this country, in order to call for fresh new elections as soon as possible. And this comes after years of deep political divide, deep constitutional clashes between the legislative power, which is in the hands of the anti-Maduro opposition, and the executive, the presidency, and the military apparatus, who are firmly in the hands of Mr. Maduro. Right now, what we are seeing is the opposition going all in, trying the card and really pushing as far as they can to try to break through this situation with the support of the White House, with the support of President Trump. We know, for example, Juan Guaido, the president of the Venezuelan parliament, has spoken with Vice President Pence and has received words of support. He has decided to throw himself in and to go all in. And now we're waiting to see the reaction from the Maduro government, Brianna.
Indeed, we will be watching for that. Stefano Pozzebon, thank you so much. We are right now in the midst of a historic shutdown of the federal government. It's the longest ever, and there's no sign that it's going to end soon as leaders in Washington fight their political battles. Just ask yourself, how hard would it be to go without a paycheck and now 2 paychecks? Then add in that for so many federal workers, you would still have to go to work. Still, while you have to go to work without getting paid, put gas in your car, pay for childcare, buy school lunches for your kids. We have heard so many people across the spectrum and across the country sharing their stories of hardship and growing desperation.
You have a 9-year-old, so how is this affecting your family?
For him to come home and ask, are we poor now? I don't need my extra milk at lunch. A 55-cent milk.
My son does work part-time. He just finished his associates. So, I'm going to be begging him for at least gas money, basically.
I was sitting at home literally thinking, which my kids or my grandkids, whose life insurance do I need to cash in to stay above water?
We start to decide, are we going to let our mortgage fall behind, our car payments, so that we can feed our children?
When school was ready to start back here in Atlanta, and she said, Mom, I don't have to have a snack. Excuse me, it's very upsetting.
I'm worried every day about, how much food I have in my house. I really would just hope that they would stop using the livelihoods of federal employees as a bargaining chip.
Please, everybody, this is serious and it's very stressful, especially those that have to go to work and they don't have time to look for jobs.
Rather than go to the hospital and risk the bills from that, you just decided to take that gamble?
My husband didn't even know that I was rationing. It's sick, but the thought of having more debt was scarier than the thought of maybe dying in my sleep.
Add to those stories the long food lines in Washington, as well as Coast Guard members and their families and on-duty FBI agents relying on food donations to survive this shutdown. New York Congressman Tom Reed is a Republican on the Ways and Means Committee. He's joining us. Thank you so much for coming back on the program. We really appreciate it.
Always great to be with you, Brianna.
So I'm struck as I listen to these federal workers. I will tell you, I've been so encouraged by some of the help they're getting from neighbors, but it's clearly not enough. And I listen to them, and you hear it. They're at risk, some of them, of going hungry, even as they're forced to work without pay. Isn't it un-American for that to happen?
Obviously, absolutely. I share with you that concern that you have for those employees. But that's why we have to talk and work out our differences here in Washington, D.C. as Democrats and Republicans. We have to talk to each other. And right now, that's not happening, Brianna.
Well, so you support President Trump's offer to Democrats. It includes temporary protection for dreamers. Why not offer permanent protection for those DACA recipients who are in the U.S. illegally because they were brought here as children in exchange for the $5 billion for a permanent wall, permanent protection for a permanent wall?
Now, Brianna, you are talking the language that I love to hear. You know, if you and I could sit down and have that conversation, I bet you and I could hash this out in moments. But to not have a partner with Nancy Pelosi at the table
But the White House
have
isn't
that
offering
conversation."
that.
Well, the president put on a reasonable, compassionate proposal to move the ball forward, and we've heard nothing from Nancy Pelosi as to a response to that. If she put that on the table, I think this thing would easily break apart and we'd get to a landing pad where we could get this government open and stand with millions of Americans as well as those children, those dreamers that supposedly we both care so deeply about.
Democrats will argue it's not a serious offer. You're clearly saying it is. I want to talk to you about something Axios is reporting, that the White House is actually considering a plan that would give the 700,000 dreamers a pathway to getting green cards. Could you support that?
I'm open to having that conversation and supporting that type of solution here. That's where, look what you're hearing, Brianna. You're hearing movement from the White House, but I do not hear any sincere movement from Nancy Pelosi and the House of Representatives. You know, it's time for Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell, do a deal in the Senate, which I think they're getting close to, send it to the House, and then let's vote on it and put our cards where our mouths are.
How is that movement from truly the movement that we've seen from the White House has been the president was okay with funding bills that then passed the Senate, then he changed his mind. I mean, there has been movement, but it's been like all over the map.
Well, there's movement now. As you saw the president address the nation, Brianna, in a way that I thought was compassionate, reasonable, and said, what is your counter response to this? And to hear crickets, to hear bickering is something that is so frustrating to me as a member who wants to solve problems here in Washington.
You think he's compassionate? I mean, he doesn't even talk about the people who are getting screwed by this whole thing.
Well, Brianna, he's talking about our fellow American citizens that have lost loved ones as a result of the broken border with the crime and the drug addiction that is coming through with the heroin and opioids. I see compassion when he says those children, those DACA children that we have been talking about for years, he's open to giving them some peace of mind, and at least we could have a conversation on that part. So there's a movement by the president here, sincere movement. I've been with him.
Hey, I have so much to call you on there because the DACA consideration in the Senate actually it doesn't provide protection. It guts DACA like 10 different ways. I mean, that's
not
really
true, Brianna. That is absolutely not true.
Okay,
that is not true.
Then let me ask
what
you.
we're doing is giving them 3 years protection for their future that is not on the table today.
It makes them reapply. It makes the very expensive application fee of $495 almost $1,000. It forces the level of what they have to prove to go higher. And I mean, that's just a tip of the iceberg of some of the things in there. You talked about the borders and drugs. I mean, the drugs are coming through the legal points of entry. You talked about...
That's why the proposal includes investments there to secure our ports of entry.
But
we
he
all
says
agree.
it's the wall.
Let us go forward with that.
He says it's the wall. You know, the Cato Institute takes issue with the crime of illegal immigrants. They've completely, gutted that claim that you just made. I want to talk to you about the economy, though, here, because it's taken a hit.
So the bottom line, Brianna, is that Nancy Pelosi, when she says she agrees that we need border security, you're saying there's no need for border security? I think the American people know better than that. They know our border needs security. It needs investments there, and our ports of entry need it. And we have a deal on the table in order to do that. Now is the time for leaders to step forward, and let's get it done in the House because we want to get this done.
I'm not saying that there shouldn't be more border security. To be clear, I'm not taking a position on that. That's your deal.
And that's exactly where a deal can be struck. And then with these DACA children, we have the door open. Let's then push the door forward as Democrats and Republicans that care about these.
I mean, I just have to be. The door is not open there.
It's on the table. I heard the president talk about it when he addressed the nation.
The rhetoric and the plan, Congressman,
get that done.
Congressman, the rhetoric and the plan are entirely different here.
That's not true. That's just not true.
It is so true. The Washington Post fact check, aside from the things that I just named, the monetary fine and
the president put DACA on the table. We have not heard any response from Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats in response to that. If they have a better solution for the DACA children, there are many of us as Republicans that will stand with those children also.
All right, so I have a question. So if you were in the reverse here and you had a Democratic president who put some sort of say what you would consider amnesty on the table, and then complain that you didn't come back with a counteroffer because clearly you wouldn't have thought that was serious from your perspective as a Republican. You think you should take the blame in a situation like that?
I think I would come. I know what I would do. I would go to the table and sit down and work this out. We could scream at each other for a half hour, 45 minutes, but at the end of the day, I wouldn't leave the room. I'd be in the room working this out and solving this problem, because the people back home and the folks that are suffering from these problems are the ones we should be putting first and foremost, not political rhetoric, political positioning that I think this ultimately is all about right now.
I want to talk to you about the economy, because the president's economic advisor, Kevin Hassett, told our Poppy Harlow here on CNN today that the shutdown could result in zero growth for the first quarter. And we're learning that the shutdown is also ironically creating security issues for the country, including at the border. So is the fight over the wall really worth this when it's hurting the U.S. economy and the security of the country?
I think border security is worth the fight, and that is where we find ourselves today. It's the reality of the situation. If I was driving the ship, would we have gotten to this position? Probably not, because I would have negotiated this in good faith and avoided everything. But now we are at the point we are, and now is the time for leaders to emerge. And I encourage both the House and Democratic and Republican leaders in both bodies, as well as the White House, stay in the room, work this out, and talk and listen to each other. That's all the American people want us to do, listen to each other.
So Democrats, one of the arguments they make is that if they budge on letting the president shut down the government, it's actually going to encourage him to do it again. Can you honestly say to me that you don't think that if they budge, can you say to me, if they budge, that he will not be encouraged to do this again?
Well, obviously, I recognize that sensitivity, but that's why we should also be talking about, we have a budget deal we're going to have to do. We're right around the corner on a debt ceiling deal. Let's be proactive and not wait till the last minute. And, that's a D.C. thing that they always do, wait till the last minute. But true leaders would negotiate this now up front before we get to that deadline, so that you don't go over the cliff because you run out of time.
All right, Congressman Tom Reed, thank you so much for being on with us. We always appreciate you.
It's always good to be. Yeah, I love being with you, Brianna.
All right, sir. See you later. Breaking news, Michael Cohen postponing his testimony before the House Oversight Committee due to threats from the president, among others. This is from Lanny Davis, Cohen's attorney. Quote, Mr. Cohen volunteered to testify before the House Oversight Committee on February 7th due to ongoing threats against his family from President Trump and Mr. Giuliani as recently as this weekend, as well as Mr. Cohen's continued cooperation with ongoing investigations. By advice of counsel, Mr. Cohen's appearance will be postponed to a later date. Mr. Cohen wishes to thank Chairman Cummings for allowing him to appear before the House Oversight Committee and looks forward to testifying at the appropriate time. This is a time where Mr. Cohen had to put his family and their safety first. That is the statement. Let's go now to Michael Smerconish. What's your reaction to that?
It would have been high on theatrics, Brianna. I don't know if it had transpired as planned or if it ever takes out that it would be all that substantive, but it'd be much-watched television, that's for sure. I'm more surprised by the stated rationale. I'm more surprised by the threats against the family than I am that this was looked at with displeasure, perhaps by the investigators, not just Mueller, but also the Southern District, who continue to look at the administration. So that's really the only surprise to me, was the explanation given as to why it would be postponed.
So you would want to know more about that, obviously. But when you look at the issue of the ongoing investigations, I mean, this is a real issue, right? Where there are a lot of things that Michael Cohen would not be able to talk about, and it would be very difficult to navigate that, presumably. But if you were his lawyer, how would you have advised him?
Well, if I were the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, slightly different answer than you're seeking from me, I would not want him to testify because this is an active investigation. I think that if I were Robert Mueller and the special counsel's office, I probably would not want this spectacle to unfold. I wouldn't want Michael Cohen's moment in the sun until after we've put forth our respective reports or report and have had our word on this, because otherwise I think that it might be something that gives up information as to an area of our inquiry that the public is not yet in the loop on.
All right, Michael, if you can stand by for me, I want to bring in Manu Raju. He's on the Hill. Manu, are lawmakers reacting to this? What's going on?
Well, this just broke, so we're trying to get to the key lawmakers. But I had been speaking to the Democrats who have been eager to talk to Michael Cohen, both in an open session and a private session, including Elijah Cummings. I asked him about some of these comments that the president had made about Michael Cohen's father-in-law, about Michael Cohen himself ahead of that testimony. And Cummings had some strong words just a few days ago telling me that the president should not be intimidating any witness coming before Congress, suggesting that this essentially is against the law. You can't do that to witnesses who are providing this kind of testimony. And over the weekend, we heard Rudy Giuliani reference Michael Cohen's father-in-law, make accusations that there could be ties to organized crime. All of that really unnerved Democrats here on Capitol Hill, worried that they would not be able to speak with Michael Cohen. And Brianna, Republicans on this same House Oversight Committee had met with Michael Cohen's attorney, Lanny Davis, and they said, according to their meeting, that Michael Cohen didn't really want to testify. They said that it was Davis who was pushing for Michael Cohen to come forward, and they said that they were told that Cohen would not be able to testify about a range of topics under investigation by the Southern District of New York, including the president being implicated in federal crimes involving those hush money payments, as well as the Trump Tower Moscow projects, which appeared to be part of the Mueller investigation. They suggested all that would not be part of the testimony. Now, Democrats, Cummings told me yesterday that they were still having discussions about the scope of the Cohen testimony. So as of last night, Democrats still expected Cohen to come forward. So his decision to delay his testimony amid concerns about threats to his family after the president's comments and about Giuliani's comments, clearly a surprise here on Capitol Hill. And they'll have to decide whether they can still get him either in an open session or a closed session before he heads to jail in March. Brianna?
Michael, bringing you back in, this is what President Trump wanted, and he'd been railing against Michael Cohen's father-in-law. But this doesn't mean, right, that Congress, could Congress hear from him after the Mueller report comes out? And that also could be even arguably more damaging when he's more free to speak?
It could take place, although let's not overlook that he'll soon lose his liberty.
That's right.
He'll soon lose his freedom. And so I frankly don't know, Brianna, what happens come March or thereafter when Michael Cohen goes away for a while, and how accessible would he be to a congressional committee from that point on?
That's a very good point. I don't know that I have seen a hearing that got over that logistical difficulty before. So I want to ask you about something else, though, while I have you. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was one of 4 freshmen who was assigned to the Oversight Committee, which is, we can already see it, right, is so actively going to be investigating the Trump administration. What did you think of that? We were going to see her ask some questions. That would have been our chance to see her in action.
Exactly. I mean, that was part of the high drama that I think many were looking forward to. On any other president's watch, I'm not so sure that House oversight would be so prestigious. It's not exactly Ways and Means. But on this president's watch, given now the investigations that'll take place by the Democratic-controlled House of this Republican administration, it's a place where a lot of action is going to unfold. And Brianna, it used to be that you'd get elected to Congress, you'd be a backbencher, bide your time, establish seniority, and over a long time period, you would become a leader. It's different now. Now you are telegenic or controversial or provocative or all of the above. You say things that draw people's interest. You become a fundraising magnet, and from that you derive real political power. That is the path on which she is on.
All right, Michael Smerconish, thank you so much. I want to bring in Sarah Murray to talk about this. Part of that statement coming from Michael Cohen's counsel, Lanny Davis, was saying that there are threats coming from Trump, from the Trump sphere. He's actually concerned about his family. What do you make of all this, Sarah?
Well, look, I think that this has been a big concern from Michael Cohen from day one. I mean, if you look at the whole sentencing process for Michael Cohen, one of the frustrations in the Southern District of New York was they felt like he didn't really confess to all of the crimes he had committed, all of the crimes he had been involved in, because he was concerned about what might happen to his family. So I don't think we should be surprised that we're continuing to see this concern from Michael Cohen about the welfare of his family. Now, this may be of a similar vein, this may be different. You know, we saw President Trump out there essentially saying members of his family should be investigated. I'm sure that invited a lot more vitriol toward Michael Cohen's way, although I'm sure he's faced plenty for being out there publicly speaking against the president for implicating President Trump when he was sentenced about the hush money payments to women. I think, though, this probably also goes hand in hand with the fact that Michael Cohen's lawyers were starting to believe that his testimony would, in fact, be unsatisfying, especially to Republicans, if he were to be giving this publicly. You know, he basically said through his lawyers that he would be unable to talk about anything that was under investigation. So that would include the Trump Tower Moscow project, that would include these hush money payments to women. And so you have to imagine that as Michael Cohen is sort of deciding this with his legal counsel as well as with his family, they may have just decided the risks associated with this were just not worth it at this time, Brianna.
How do you think the president is going to see this? I would expect, I would say it's likely that he might tweet about this. How do you think he'll spin what this means?
You know, maybe he will see it as Michael Cohen backing down, if I just have to guess what President Trump might tweet next. I'm sure that Trump and everyone else in the White House, his own legal defense team, would probably be thrilled not to have to deal with Michael Cohen on Capitol Hill with the throng of media hanging on to his every word. I don't think that was something that the White House was particularly looking forward to. But of course, this doesn't preclude the fact that Michael Cohen could still talk to these committees behind closed doors. He could still provide some kind of testimony publicly at some point. He says it's postponed in this statement. He doesn't say, you know, it's canceled indefinitely. And as we know from Michael Cohen, he usually has many more tricks up his sleeve. So we'll see what happens next, Brianna.
Indeed. All right. Bringing Manu Raju back into this conversation. You're up there on Capitol Hill. I know you've been trying to track down some of the key lawmakers here. You just heard the report that we would expect, or that the lawyers for Michael Cohen were expecting, that his testimony was going to be unsatisfying, even to Democrats who really wanted to hear what he had to say. Indeed, it was going to be. So I wonder how you think they're reacting.
Yeah, and they still wanted to hear, according to Elijah Cummings, his personal story, things that he was involved with the president over the years. A lot of the controversies, the scandals, the crimes, perhaps some of the details that he couldn't get into, but they believed they could still learn a lot about what Michael Cohen did for this president that had not been fully uncovered by his interviews that he's done or through the court filings. But it was still uncertain, Brianna, the extent to which he could have he could reveal some of the conversations that occurred around the Trump Tower Moscow project, in particular with the president, even though the Republicans said that this was not going to be satisfying, according to their conversation with Lanny Davis, who is Michael Cohen's attorney. Democrats said that these were still discussions that were ongoing, the extent to which they could get him to discuss some of these matters going forward. But it really does also just go to show you, Brianna, that the limits of what the Democrats can do despite wielding the subpoenas, besides having the gavels. If the witnesses don't want to comply, they don't really have much of a recourse. Sure, they can send a subpoena, but if a witness decides to fight that subpoena or not provide documents or records, they could get into a long legal battle before getting someone to actually provide that testimony. And this is one example of that. Clearly, the reason why he's citing is not necessarily he doesn't want to, but because of what he says are threats to his family as a result of the president going after his father-in-law, Rudy Giuliani, which is a remarkable statement to say about the sitting president of the United States. But nevertheless, a blow for the Democratic efforts to investigate this president, because Michael Cohen clearly was one key witness that they wanted to hear from about everything he's done with the president over the years.
Monty, a quick question about this. Because Michael Cohen does go to prison in the spring, have you ever, in all your years of covering Congress, heard of what would happen bringing a witness from prison? I mean, is that even possible?
I highly doubt it. We did try to ask Richard Burr, the Senate Intelligence Committee chairman, about talking to Michael Cohen after he goes to prison in March, and he said it's much harder to interview witnesses from jail. So that's why there was such a concerted push, not just by the House Oversight Committee to bring him in public, but also to testify in classified settings before the Senate Intelligence Committee, the House Intelligence Committee. Adam Schiff this morning made very clear on the House side that he expected Cohen to come forward. If not voluntarily, he was preparing to subpoena Michael Cohen to come forward. So we'll see what Cohen does, because he could certainly ignore that subpoena, knowing that he's going to jail nonetheless. And Congress may never hear from Michael Cohen again, Brianna.
So, Monty, while I have you, there's protests that are erupting outside of Mitch McConnell's office. They are chanting, "Where is Mitch?" And "Stop the shutdown." There are votes tomorrow on these competing bills that we're expecting both of them are going to fail.
Yeah, they are, and they're outside Mitch McConnell's office in the Russell office building, but does not spend most of his time there. He spends most of his time in the United States Capitol, and that's where protesters don't have access to. He did go to the floor today, making it very clear that he supports the Trump plan moving forward, but that Trump plan needs 60 votes in order to advance tomorrow. They are not going to get 60 votes. The Democratic plan to reopen the government for 3 weeks needs Republican support. It's going to lack enough Republican support to go forward. Brianna, in a key development, Tom Tillis, who's up in 2020, told me he was not going to support that Democratic plan going forward.
I am so sorry. I'm so sorry to interrupt you, because we're looking at the live video, and we're actually seeing protesters there outside of Mitch McConnell's office. Yes, this is his office in a House office or in a Senate office building. He's not there very often, but obviously there's a lot of symbolism, and we are actually seeing people who appear to be restrained and are being led away by police there. So we're going to keep an eye on this, and we'll take a quick break and be right back.